That morning, as the first light of dawn timidly filtered through the dense leaves surrounding the farm, Deep awoke with a strange feeling, both a sense of relief and a wistfulness, much like the lingering morning mist on the grass. The gentle light streaming through the old wooden window caressed her face, where small scars from the past still lingered like indelible memories that could never be erased. Outside, the cheerful chirping of birds blended with the soft breeze rustling through the fields, carrying the breath of the earth and sky, a reminder that after life's storms she had found a peaceful haven with CEO James, the man with a warm heart and deep, determined eyes. Yet deep within her soul, one question quietly echoed. Did she, a woman who had endured so much suffering, truly deserve such tenderness? We invite you to continue with episode 10 of the story. Enjoy the tale. The small house on James's farm, though modest with its plain wooden walls and a tiled roof, faded by time, had become a safe refuge for Deep after the long days of being torn between her past and present. She rose from her simple bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor as her breath mingled with the crisp morning air. Her eyes fell upon Hucky, the little dog curled up in a corner, its shaggy coat gently stirring with each measured breath. "Good morning, Hucky," she murmured softly, her voice as gentle as a passing breeze, and carrying a hint of warmth amid the winter chill. The little dog looked up at her with bright, sparkling eyes and a tail that wagged in greeting, and Deep smiled. A rare but sincere smile, like sunlight breaking through cloudy skies. Hucky was not only a loyal companion, but also a fragment of the memories she carried from the painful days when she had been confined by the harsh words and cold indifference of her ex-in-laws. Stepping out into the yard, she found a flock of chickens cheerfully clucking under the soft morning light, their tiny wings flapping gently, as if waiting for her familiar hand to scatter their feed. These chickens, once cared for by a former servant, had now become an inseparable part of Deep's new life. She opened a small bag and scattered the grains onto the ground, watching them peck eagerly with innocent delight. In that moment, she felt a simplicity she had longed for during her darkest, most desperate nights. "Hucky, I'll give you some food in a moment," she said, her eyes drifting over the dog, dashing around the yard, its tail wagging as if eager to explore every corner of this little world. Hucky, with his stubby legs and dirt-streaked fur, seemed to share in the freedom Deep was beginning to seek, a freedom she had once believed would forever elude her. Inside the modest kitchen, Deep kindled a small fire. Soon a flickering flame sprang to life from the dry sticks, casting a warmth that chased away the bitter chill of the early winter morning. She lifted the lid of a pot of meat congee left over from the previous night, the very congee that James had carefully prepared for her while she lay in bed, her fever so high that her eyes had grown dim from exhaustion. "I wonder if he's cold," she mused silently, as her hand stirred the congee on the stove with gentle, deliberate movements. The rising steam carried the rich aroma of minced meat mingled with glutinous rice, and in that instant her heart felt lighter, as though old wounds were slowly dissolving into the soft white vapor. She scooped a portion of the congee into a small bowl for Hucky, and then turned back to watch the dancing flames. "Did James stay here overnight?" she murmured, a trace of confusion in her eyes as she recalled the image of James sitting by her bedside throughout the night, his eyes heavy with worry and his hand softly touching her forehead to check her fever. Soft footsteps echoed from the doorway, breaking through Deep's lingering thoughts. She lifted her head, and before her stood James, a tall figure clad in a thick grey coat, his eyes bright despite the lingering fatigue from a sleepless night. "Good morning, Deep," he said, his deep, warm voice like a gentle breeze sweeping through a field, carrying the tenderness she had gradually grown accustomed to. Deep startled, her hand pausing mid-air above the congee pot. Then she offered a small smile, one that lit up her face, still marked by traces of weariness. "James, you're up? I didn't expect you to sleep here." James stepped further into the room, his gaze drifting over the modest kitchen, until it settled on the steaming pot on the stove. "Last night you had a fever. I didn't dare leave because I was afraid you'd be alone and uncared for," he replied, his tone filled with such sincere care that it sent a shiver through Deep's heart, as if a tender string had been lightly plucked. She lowered her head, struggling to hide the swell of emotions rising in her chest. "Thank you. I'm just reheating the congee. Will you have breakfast with me?" James nodded, pulling an old wooden chair over to the table and sitting down. His eyes never left hers, as if he wished to memorize every subtle movement. Deep ladled the congee into two chipped white bowls, placing one in front of James before softly saying, "Please, you go ahead and eat first. I'll eat a bit later." But James shook his head, his firm hand drawing the bowl closer to her. "No, eat with me. Let me blow on it to cool it down for you." He leaned over, gently blowing on the white tendrils of steam rising from the bowl, and Deep couldn't help but feel the warmth in that gesture. A kindness so foreign to her after the days of confinement under her ex-husband Pau's household. "This warm bowl of congee on such a cold day is wonderful," James remarked, his voice resonating in the quiet space of the kitchen, offering a simple yet heartfelt compliment. "You really are a good cook, Deep." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening like droplets of morning dew. "It's actually the congee you cooked last night. I just reheated it. Have you forgotten?" James paused, then broke into a clear, light-hearted laugh that rang out in the cozy room. The atmosphere between them grew gentle and light, like a soft wind stirring through the fields, dissolving any unspoken tension. As Deep watched James, her heart filled with a blend of gratitude, admiration, and something unnamed. A small, smoldering flame of emotion kindling deep within her. "I plan to finish tending the garden today," she said quietly, as if afraid to disturb the peaceful calm. "After that, I'll go into the woods to gather wild herbs to sell for a little extra money." James nodded, his eyes alight with a thoughtful idea. "What do you intend to use to fence the garden?" "With bamboo," she replied. "But you mentioned buying fabric nets, so I suppose I won't have to cut too many." James stood up, setting his bowl aside with a determined tone. "Bamboo is hard to transport. Let me buy you the fabric nets. It will be easier." He stepped out into the yard, his gaze briefly drifting to Haki, who was darting among the bushes. "Haki, be a good boy here while I take care of some things. And thank you for the congee, Deep." Deep watched his silhouette gradually vanish behind the wooden gate, murmuring softly, "Take care, James." As he departed, she stood quietly for a moment, a sudden emptiness rising within her, as if his presence had become an indispensable part of her new life. "He is so kind," she whispered to herself, "always there to help me." Yet deep inside, she wondered whether such tenderness was merely pity or something deeper, something she had yet to confront. While driving back to the office, James's mind kept drifting to the image of Dieppe by the warm congee pot. The ringing of his phone snapped him out of his reverie. "Hello, Tom?" he said, his voice calm yet tinged with fatigue. On the other end was Tung, the longtime friend James had arranged to meet to discuss selling the pomelo orchard. "That's right, James," Tung replied enthusiastically. "Are you buying my pomelo farm? I was busy yesterday and only just got free." James nodded, though Tung couldn't see him over the phone. "Let's meet at the cafe in 30 minutes, okay?" When James arrived at the cafe, Tung was already seated at a small wooden table, a steaming cup of black coffee in front of him. "Have you been waiting long?" James asked apologetically as he sat down in the chair across from him. Tung laughed heartily and patted James on the shoulder. "Not at all. I just got here. What were you up to yesterday that got you here so early?" James took a sip of water, his eyes clouded with a touch of melancholy. "I had some personal matters to attend to. I've already looked over your pomelo farm, and I'm very pleased with it." Tung nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Your pomelos are of excellent quality. How many green-skinned pomelo trees are you offering?" "I have 300 green-skinned trees, the rest are sugar pomelos," James answered, his tone steady and assured. Tung clapped his hands. "300 trees? Deal." He laughed loudly, then asked with curiosity, "By the way, how's that girl Deep doing?" James's eyes brightened as he spoke of Deep. "Fortunately, I've redeemed her. She's now at my farm." Tung nodded with satisfaction. "Great. Here's 200 million VND as a deposit, 100 million in cash, and the rest I'll transfer." James waved his hand dismissively, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "No need to count. I trust you." After a firm handshake, the transaction was completed in a warm, friendly atmosphere. "Thanks. I'm heading back now," James said as he stood up to leave, feeling a sense of relief yet still deep in thought about Dieppe. As he stepped outside, the midday sun shone upon his face, but inside, the image of Dieppe with her gentle smile remained ever present, like a cool, refreshing breeze on a sweltering summer day. Back at the farm, Deep stood in the small garden, a sharp knife in hand as she cut down bamboo, each decisive chop echoing steadily through the quiet afternoon. "Haki, stay here. I'm off to cut a few bamboo stakes," she said, her gaze drifting to the little dog lying curled under a tree, its tail wagging lightly in agreement. The tall bamboos in the forest demanded her full strength. Sweat streamed down her forehead, soaking her worn-out shirt. Yet she pressed on. "Hard work reaps sweet rewards," she murmured to herself, her calloused hands gripping the knife firmly with every stroke, a testament to her resilience after the days when her past had weighed her down. The sound of a car approaching from the gate made Deep lift her head, and there was James, stepping out with the fatigue of his journey etched on his face, but his eyes shining brightly as he saw her amid the garden. "Deep, where did you get the bamboo from?" he asked, with genuine concern, moving closer with evident worry. Deep wiped the sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her shirt and smiled softly. I got it from up there. I already had a bowl of congee too. Come with me, I want to check on your health. James frowned, his eyes scanning her pale face with anxiety. You look so weak, so pale. Let's go see a doctor. Deep shook her head, her voice soft yet resolute. No need, I'm fine. But James was not to be swayed. He stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. No, we must go. I can see you're not well. Locking the wooden door of the house, he turned to look at Haki, who was wagging his tail on the doorstep. Haki, watch the house while we're gone, he said. With a reluctant sigh, Deep followed him out. Though her heart felt warmed by James's care, she was also filled with confusion over such attention. As she climbed into the car, her eyes drifted over the slowly receding view of the farm, and she wondered whether this care was something she truly deserved. At Dr. Tway's clinic, a calm silence filled the small room, lightly tinged with the scent of antiseptic. Good morning, doctor. Please start an IV for her, James said, his tone deep and warm yet laced with worry. Dr. Tway checked Deep's pulse and nodded. She has a fever and a sore throat. The IV will do her good. Standing just outside the room, James watched Deep through the glass window, his heart heavy with the fear of losing her. You must get better. I don't want to see you in pain anymore, he murmured. Lying on the bed, with her thin hands clutching the edge of the blanket, Deep's eyes glazed over in the haze of memories, but James's presence made her feel safer than ever. After the IV treatment, Deep sat up, her eyes brighter and her face regaining a bit of its strength. I feel better now, thank you, she said softly. James smiled gently. Then let's go home. On the way back, he pulled over at a small shop by the roadside. His gaze drifted over the display of bedding, pillows, blankets, and cushions neatly hung on racks. You must be cold. Let me buy you something, he said in a gentle whisper. Deep shook her head, a hint of hesitation in her eyes. It's too expensive. Just get me the cheapest set. But James was insistent, pointing at a thick, warm blanket. No, this one is warmer. Choose whichever you like. They settled on a modest set, a simple blanket, a soft cushion, and an old towel Deep planned to use to keep Hake warm. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice brimming with gratitude. James beamed, his eyes lighting up. You're welcome. Now let's head home. Tonight I'm craving some grilled chicken. Deep nodded, a rare smile lighting up her face. I'll get the fire going while you start on the chicken, she replied. As they stepped into the car, the afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, bathing Deep's face in a warm glow, as if washing away the lingering shadows within her. That evening, in the small kitchen, a soft flame flickered as it danced over the modest countertop. The golden-orange light fell upon Deep and James, painting a warm picture against the cold night. James brought in a chicken, freshly cleaned from the coop, and placed it on the old wooden table. Here are the seasonings: lemongrass, chili, fish sauce, ginger, pepper. Please marinate the chicken for me, he said. Di-Pick nodded, her hands deftly mixing the spices into each piece of meat. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, a promise of the peace she was slowly beginning to feel. Do you often grill chicken like this? She asked, her eyes curiously scanning his face. James chuckled softly, his voice deep and comforting. Not often. I usually just have the legs and neck. Today, though, I want you to enjoy it. When the chicken turned a beautiful golden brown, James arranged it on a bed of freshly gathered green leaves. The enticing aroma made Diep's mouth water. It's delicious. I've never had anything like this before, she said. They sat facing each other, the dancing firelight creating an intimate atmosphere amid the quiet of the night. Eat up, James urged, with a tone full of affection. And don't cry anymore. From now on, may your tears only be for joy. Deep looked up, her heart stirred by his words, as if a door within her had just been unlocked. May I ask you something? She began, her voice soft, yet filled with courage. Do you have feelings for me? James paused, a hint of confusion crossing his eyes at the sudden question. Then he smiled gently, a smile as tender as moonlight. I suppose you could say that. Your question caught me off guard. I'm not quite sure how to answer, but I do feel a strong urge to take care of you. Deep lowered her head, her voice trembling. All right, I understand. You don't need to say more. A heavy silence fell, as if a cold wind had suddenly swept through, laden with unspoken words. James stood up and set his chopsticks aside. I have some reports to go through, so I'll head back. Good night, Deep. He stepped out into the yard, his tall silhouette gradually fading into the night, leaving Deep seated alone at the table, her heart burdened with sorrow and uncertainty. Maybe he doesn't love me. Maybe he just feels sorry for me," she whispered, glancing at Hucky, curled up on the doorstep. Yet deep inside, she knew that staying with James was not only about gratitude for his protection, but also because of a feeling she hadn't dared to name. A budding love quietly taking root amid the calm of ordinary days. Episode 10 closes with an image both warm and emotionally complex. After enduring tumultuous days in her past, Deep has chosen to stay by James, not merely for the protection he offers, but because her heart has begun to stir in response to his genuine tenderness and care. James, with his kind soul and unspoken love, has become her steadfast pillar, even as both remain hesitant to fully confront their feelings. Beneath the flickering light of the small kitchen, amid incomplete words and shared glances, their love quietly blossoms like a tender green shoot emerging in the midst of a cold winter. Stay tuned for episode 11, where Deep and James will work together to build the farm and confront new challenges arising from both their past and present. Will the fragile love between them have the strength to overcome invisible barriers, or will old shadows return to test their hearts once more? A new journey awaits. A journey where deep emotions and difficult decisions continue to weave the inspiring story of their lives.